today, let's take a sneak peek into the Geneva Bible, a said facsimile of the 1599 edition with undated Sternhold and Hopkins Psalms. Herbert 248, the earliest of the 1599 editions that he records, with an introduction by Michael H. Brown. We are not too sure if this is the guy with the glasses and the beard that had a debate with Tovia Singer, or Rabbi Tovia Singer, and caused him some upset that he did further videos on it. Preface. Every edition of the Geneva Bible contains thousands of marginal notes authored by the leaders of the Reformation. Those leaders were men such as John Calvin, John Knox, Miles Coverdale, and others. Strangely enough, there has never been a really comprehensive study of those marginal notes. Stranger still is the fact that the majority of today's Protestants consider themselves Calvinists and have almost no conception of what John Calvin believed in or stood for. The most Calvinistic of the Geneva Bibles was the edition printed from 1599 onwards, though the first edition of 1560 contained enough Calvinistic marginal notes to incense the Anglican clergy. In a memorandum to the translators of the Bishop's Bible, Archbishop Parker wrote, "Item to make no bitter notes upon any text, or yet to see down any determination in place of controversy." Pollard Records, page 297. Okay, so we're going to go have a little look around the internet and find out who this John Calvin was. Here we came across this information. John Calvin, Middle French Jean Calvin, French Jean Calvin, etc., etc. Born 10th of July 1509 to 27th May 1564. Was a French theologian. Oh, I thought he was English. It's actually French. Pastor and reformer. Protestant reformers were theologians whose careers, works and actions brought about the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. In Geneva during the Protestant Reformation. Reformation, also known as the Protestant Reformation, and the European Reformation, was a major theological movement in Western Christianity in 16th century Europe that posed a religious and political challenge to the papacy, or the Roman Catholic Church, and the authority of that church. He was a principal figure in the development of the system of Christian theology, which is the theology, the systematic study of the divine and religion of Christianity and Christian belief and practice. It concentrates primarily upon the text of the Old Testament and of the New Testament, as well as on Christian tradition. I think it says here that Christian theologians use biblical exegesis. Okay, so it was later called Calvinism, obviously named after him. Reformed Christianity, also called Calvinism, is a major branch of Protestantism that began during the 16th century Protestant Reformation, a schism in the Western Church. In the modern day, it is largely represented by the Continental Presbyterian, etc. And this includes doctrines of predestination. In theology, that is the doctrine that all events have been willed by God, usually with reference to the eventual fate of the individual soul. Explanations of predestination often seek to address the paradox of free will, whereby God's omniscience seems incompatible with human life or activities. I'm not too sure what the rest of that was. Okay, so, and of God's absolute sovereignty, his rule above all. The view within Christian theology which holds that God works through the Holy Spirit to bring about the salvation of an individual through spiritual regeneration, regardless of the individual's cooperation. It is most often associated with Lutheranism, etc. Okay, so God's absolute sovereignty in the salvation of the human soul from death and eternal damnation. Calvinist doctrines were influenced by and elaborated upon the Augustinian. Okay, probably the writings of the Church Father Augustine and other Christian traditions. Various congregational, Reformed, and Presbyterian churches who looked to Calvin as the chief expositor of their beliefs, has spread throughout the world. Calvin was a tireless polemicist, a contentious rhetoric intended to support a specific position by forthright claims and to undermine the opposing position. The practice of such arguments is called polemics, which are seen in arguments on controversial topics. And he's an apologetic branch of Christian theology that defends Christianity. Writer who generated much controversy. He also exchanged cordial and supportive letters with many reformers, including Philip Melanchthon, a German Lutheran reformer, collaborator with Martin Luther, the first systematic theologian of the Protestant Reformation, an intellectual leader of the Lutheran Reformation, and influential designer of educational systems. And Heinrich Bullinger was a Swiss reformer and theologian, the successor of Huldrych Zwingli as head of the Church of Zurich and a pastor at the Grossmünster, one of the most important leaders of the Swiss Reformation, and he co-authored the Helvetic. In addition to Calvin's seminal Institutes of the Christian Religion, Calvin wrote commentaries on most of the books of the Bible. We're fairly sure it's referring to Calvin there to begin with. It could be referring to, we believe it's probably referring to Calvin. In addition to the seminal Institutes of the Christian Religion, a John Calvin seminal work of systematic theology, regarded as one of the most influential works of Protestant theology, it was published in Latin in 1536, at the same time as Henry VIII of England's dissolution of the monasteries. Okay, so Calvin wrote commentaries on most books of the Bible, confessional documents, also known as a creed. Confession of faith, a symbol or a statement of faith, is a statement of the shared beliefs of a community in a form which is structured by subjects which summarize its core tenets, and various other theological treatises. Calvin was originally trained as a humanist, lawyer, centered on nature and importance of humanity that emerged from the study of classical antiquity. This first began in Italy and then spread across Western Europe in the 14th, 15th and 16th centuries. He broke from the Roman Catholic Church around 1530. After religious tensions erupted in widespread deadly violence against Protestant Christians in France, Calvin led to Basel, Switzerland. He fled there, where in 1536 he published his first edition of the Institutes. In that same year, Calvin was recruited by Frenchman William Farel to join the Reformation in Geneva, where he regularly preached sermons throughout the week. However, the government council of the city resisted the implementation of the ideas, and both men were expelled, kicked out of there, ousted out. At the invitation of Martin Bucer, a German reformer based in Strasbourg who influenced the Lutheran, Calvinist and Anglican doctrines and practices, he was originally a member of the Dominican order, but after meeting and being influenced by Martin Luther in 1518, he probably opted out. Calvin proceeded to Strasbourg, where he became the minister of a church of French refugees. He continued to support the reform movement in Geneva, and in 1541 he was invited back to lead the church of the city. Okay, and there's more information here on his life, what happened to him during his life. His reform work commences 1536 to 1538, and he becomes minister in Strasbourg 1538-1541. Reform in Geneva 1541 to 1549. Discipline and opposition 1546 to 1553. Calvin encountered bitter opposition to his work in Geneva. Around 1546, the uncoordinated forces coalesced, or got gathered together, into an identifiable group whom he referred to as the Libertines. A person questioning and challenging most moral principles such as responsibility or sexual restraints, and will often declare those traits as unnecessary for undesirable. A libertine is especially someone who ignores or even spurns accepted morals and forms of behaviour, but who prefer to be called either spiritual spirituals or patriarchs. According to Calvin, these were the people who felt that after being liberated through grace, God's grace, they were exempted from both ecclesiastical and civil law. The group consisted of wealthy, politically powered and interrelated families of Geneva. At the end of January 1546, Pierre Armeau, a maker of playing cards who had already been in conflict with the consistory, attacked Calvin by calling him a Picard, an epithet denoting anti-French sentiment, and accused him of false doctrine. It's like throwing an insult at him, probably, like, your mother is a she-goat. Something like that. It's from Monty Python, right? The Holy Grail. Amo was punished by the council and forced to make expiation by parading through the city and begging God for forgiveness. A few months later, Armine Perrin, the man who had brought Calvin to Geneva, moved into open opposition. Perrin had married François Favre, daughter of François Favre, so it must be Francois or something. See something slightly different there, right? Our French sucks. Okay. A well-established Geneva merchant. Both Perrin's wife and father-in-law had previous conflicts with the consistory. The court noted that many of Geneva's notables, including Perrin, had breached a law against dancing. So they had a law you couldn't dance? Oh, that sucks. Initially, Perrin ignored the court when he was summoned, but after receiving a letter from Calvin, he appeared before the consistory. And so forth. And it talks about Michael Servetus, 1553. The turning point in Calvin's fortunes occurred when Michael Servetus, a brilliant Spanish polymath who introduced the Islamic idea, and here it is there, of pulmonary circulation, to Europe, and a fugitive from ecclesiastical authorities, appeared in Geneva on 13th August 1553. Servetus was a fugitive on the run after he published The Restoration of Christianity, 1553. Calvin's scholar Bruce Gordon commented among its offences were a denial of original sin and a bizarre and hardly comprehensible view of the Trinity. Decades earlier, in July 1530, he disputed with Johannes Oecolampadius, a German Protestant reformer in the Calvinist tradition, and so forth. Securing the Protestant Reformation, 1553 to 1555. After the death of Servetus, Calvin was acclaimed a defender of Christianity, but his ultimate triumph over the libertines was still 2 years away. He had always insisted that the consistory retain the power of excommunication, despite the council's past decision to take it away. Final years, 1555 to 1564. Calvin's authority was practically uncontested during his final years, and he enjoyed an international reputation as a reformer distinct from Martin Luther. Initially, Luther and Calvin had mutual respect for each other. A doctrinal conflict had developed between Luther and Zurich reformer Huldreich Zwingli on the interpretation of the Eucharist. Calvin's opinion on the issue forced Luther to place him on Zwingli's camp. Calvin actively participated in the polemics that were the consensus, the exchange between the Lutheran and Reformed branches of the Reformation movement. At the same time, Calvin was dismayed by the lack of unity among the reformers. He took steps towards rapprochement with Bullinger by signing the Consensus Tigurinus. And what is that? Well, Consensus of Zurich was a Protestant document written in 1549 by John Calvin and Heinrich Bullinger. A Concordat, which is a convention between the Holy See, it's like a seer or oracle, and a sovereign state that defines the relationship between the Catholic Church and the state in matters that concern both, for example, the recognition of privileges of the Catholic Church in a particular country. Does it say, and with secular mannerisms? Not really sure on that. Between the Zurich and Geneva churches. He reached out to England when Archbishop of Canterbury Thomas Cranmer called for an ecumenical synod of all the evangelical churches. Calvin praised the idea, but ultimately Cranmer was unable to bring it to function. He couldn't get it to work right. Calvin sheltered Marian exiles, English Protestants who fled to continental Europe during 1553 to 1558. reign of the Catholic monarchs Queen Mary I and King Philip. They settled chiefly in Protestant countries such as the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Germany, and also in France, Italy, and Poland. And so those who fled the reign of Catholic Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, yeah, we thought so. She must have been pretty vicious, right? Also known as Mary I, also known as Mary Tudor, and as Bloody Mary by her Protestant opponents, was Queen of England and Ireland from July 1553, and Queen of Spain and the Habsburg dominions as wife of King Philip II from January 1556 until her death. Okay, and so forth. Impact on France. Theology, Calvin's theology. Controversies. Calvin's theology caused controversy. Pierre Caroli, a Protestant minister in Lausanne, accused Calvin as well as Verret and Farel of Arianism, as a Christological doctrine considered heretical by all modern mainstream branches of Christianity. It is first attributed to Arius, a Christian presbyter who preached and studied in Alexandria, Egypt. Arian theology holds that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, etc. Calvin defended his beliefs on the Trinity and Confessio de Trinitate Propter Calumnius. P. Carroll severely maligned Calvin's character, and so forth. Calvin and the Jews. Scholars have debated Calvin's view of the Jews and Judaism. Some have argued that Calvin was the least anti-Semitic among all the major reformers of his time. Remember, Martin Luther apparently wrote a book about the Jews, blaming them for certain things, so he was labelled anti-Semite, especially in comparison to Martin Luther. Others have argued that Calvin was firmly within the anti-Semitic camp. Scholars argue that it is important to distinguish between Calvin's views toward the biblical Jews and his attitude towards contemporary Jews. In his theology, Calvin does not differentiate between God's covenant with Israel and the new covenant. He stated, all the children of the promise, reborn of God, who have obeyed the commands by faith working through love, have belonged to the new covenant since the world began. Nevertheless, he was a covenant theologian and argued that the Jews are a rejected people who must embrace Jesus to re-enter the covenant. Most of Calvin's statements on the Jewry of his era were polemic. For example, Calvin once wrote, I have had much conversation with many Jews. I have never seen either a drop of piety or a grain of truth or ingenuousness. No, I have never found common sense in any Jew. That's his words, not ours. In this respect, he differed little from other Protestant and Catholic theologians of his day. Among his extant writings, Calvin dealt explicitly with issues of contemporary Jews and Judaism in only one treatise, Response to Questions and Objections of a Certain Jew. In it, he argued that Jews misread their own scriptures because they miss the unity of the Old and New Testaments. Which could be true. They're very Old Testament orientated, aren't they? Anything in the New Testament, i.e. Rabbi Tobiah Singer, apparently he can't stand the Gospels, he is continually speaking out against him, saying, oh, no, this is fake, it doesn't mean that, all that sort of stuff. Political thought, libellous attacks by Bolsec. Someone wrote a biography of Calvin. This guy wrote a biography of Calvin in 1577. Jerome Bolsec, a French Carmelite theologian and physician who became a Protestant and controversialist, later returned to the Catholic Church. Okay, so he went all through that and he went back to being a Roman Catholic. And he claimed that Calvin had committed sodomy while in Noyon in 1527, aged 18, and that he only at the last minute escaped the standard punishment of being burnt at the stake, instead receiving the very lenient alternative of being branded with a fleur de lis. Fleur de lis? Yeah, okay, that's like quite a popular thing, isn't it? You see it on fences, gates, maybe even the Boy Scouts. Yeah, their symbol. Yeah. So they're being branded with a fleur de lis on the shoulder. This today is viewed as libellous slander by Bolsec, a former associate who had fallen out with Calvin and returned to Catholicism, and who accused him posthumously and rhetorically of many unchristian types of sexual behaviour. Bolsec is known to have conflated events, or exaggerated maybe, blown them up beyond proportion. events from the lives of at least 2 men from Noyon. So this guy basically exaggerated and made stuff up. From Noyon named Jean Calvin. Adding to that rumours and fiction. And Irina Bacchus explains his libellous accusations as a reaction to an over-apologetic article by Beza, who had exaggeratedly praised the reformers' moral qualities. Selected works. Calvin's first published work was a commentary of Seneca the Younger's De Clementia. Published at his own expense in 1532, it showed that he was a humanist in the tradition of Erasmus, a Dutch Christian humanist, Catholic theologian, educational satirist, and philosopher. Through his vast numbers of translations, books, essays, prayers, and letters, he is considered one of the most respected, etc., whatever it continues to say, most authoritative on that. And he basically wanted to finish translating or retranslate Jerome's works. Supposedly the guy was a younger man lover. Okay, when he went to lecture at different universities or a certain university, he supposedly tried to seduce a student who may have told his parents, or his parents found out, and so he runs off, he goes somewhere else and makes out he's a womanizer. Okay, you have to do the research on that. This is what we've heard, this is what we've read, but we're not saying that he was, okay? Okay, because apparently he puts a lot of homosexual undertones in his translation, but then again you have to go do the research on that. Establish those claimed facts as established facts. Find the evidence that proves that it's self-evident. Okay, it proves that he was, etc., etc. Okay, you have to do the homework on that statement. Calvin produced commentaries on most of the books of the Bible. His first commentary on Romans was published in 1540, and he planned to write commentaries on the entire New Testament. 6 years passed before he wrote his second, a commentary on the first epistle to the Corinthians. But after that, he devoted more attention to reaching his goal. Within 4 years, he had published commentaries on the Pauline epistles, the letters of Paul, and he also reviewed the commentary on Romans. He then turned his attention to the general epistles, dedicating them to Edward VI of England. By 1555 he had completed his work on the New Testament, finishing with the Acts and the lectures to be published. Finishing with the Acts and the Gospels. He omitted only the brief second and third epistles of John and Book of Revelation. For the Old Testament he wrote commentaries on Isaiah, the books of the Pentateuch, the Psalms, okay, so he did it for the Jewish version of the Pentateuch, is it? The Torah is known as Pentateuch. The Psalms and Joshua, the material lectures to be published from stenographer's notes, and so forth. He wrote many letters and treatises following the Responsio ad Sadoletum, etc. His legacy. After the deaths of Calvin and his successor Beza, the Geneva City Council gradually gained control over areas of life that were previously in the ecclesiastical domain. Increasing secularization was accompanied by the decline of the church. Even the Geneva Academy was eclipsed by universities in Leiden and Heidelberg, which became the new strongholds of Calvin's ideas, first identified as Calvinism by Joachim Westphal in 1552. By 1585, Geneva, once the wellspring of the Reform movement, had become merely its symbol. Calvin had always warned against describing him as an idol and Geneva as a New Jerusalem. He encouraged people to adapt to the environments in which they found themselves. Even during his polemical exchange with Westphal, he advised a group of French-speaking refugees who had settled in Wesel, Germany, a city in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. It is the capital of the Wesel district, to integrate it with the local Lutheran churches. Despite his differences with the Lutherans, he did not deny that they were members of the true church. Calvin's recognition of the need to adapt to local conditions became an important characteristic of the Reformation movement as it spread across Europe. Due to Calvin's missionary work in France, his program of reform eventually reached the French-speaking provinces of the Netherlands. Calvinism was adopted in the electorate of the Palatinate under Frederick III, which led to the formulation of the Heidelberg Catechism in 1563. This and Belgic Confession were adopted as confessional standards in the First Synod of the Dutch Reformed Church in 1571. Several leading divines, either Calvinist or those sympathetic to Calvinism, settled in England: Martin Bucer, Peter Martyr, and John Lasky, and Scotland, John Knox. Yeah, it might be Jan Lasky. Is that a guy or a female? A woman? Probably a guy. Yes, a guy. Probably something like Jean. In Scotland, John Knox. During the English Civil War, the Calvinistic Puritans produced the Westminster Confession, which became the confessional standard for Presbyterians. And so forth. As the Ottoman Empire did not force Muslim conversion on its conquered western territories, reformed ideas were quickly adopted in the 2/3 of Hungary they occupied. The Habsburg-ruled third part of Hungary remained Catholic. A reformed constitutional synod was held in 1567 in Debrecen, depends on whether it is Hungary, the main hub of Hungarian Calvinism, where the Second Helvetic Confession was adopted as the official confession of Hungarian Calvinists. Calvin did not live to see the foundation of his work grow into an international movement, but his death allowed his ideas to break out in their city of origin, to succeed far beyond their borders, and to establish their own distinct character. Calvin is recognized as a renewer of the church in Lutheran churches, commemorated on 26th of May every year. Calvin is also remembered in the Church of England with a commemoration on the same day. So that is all about John Calvin and what he was really like, for those who claim to be Calvinists and yet they have no clue what John Calvin was all about.